my name is Katakino and my partner is Jaron. We are going to be presenting about the Yersinia pestis, hazard warning. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is the classification. So to get started, I want to give a little info about the background of what is taxonomy, which is this pyramid that I'm going to be talking about. I have the 8 levels of classification. You may be wondering, what are the levels of classification? This is where organisms are classified or placed in inclusive grouping. Think about it in this way. When you go to the shopping center or grocery market, everything is categorized by specific groups, right? Shopping centers have shirts, pants, shoes, and accessories all placed in different compartments, but in each compartment, there are different brands or colors or even different types of categories. Just like the same thing with grocery stores, where meats, fruits, and vegetables or dairies are placed in different sections, right? This is just like the levels of classification. Highest on the pyramid is domain. Domain has the most individuals in its group, where it is recognized by 3 domains. They are broken down into bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Second level, we have kingdom, where even more of the domains are broken down into 6 of the kingdoms, which are eubacteria, bacteria, plant T, animalia, fungi, and protista. And third in the period, we have phylum, which is basically a direct line of descendants with a smaller group. We have class, where they share the characteristics of phylum, but are there because they had advanced characteristics that make them unique. After that, we have order, which is even more broken down. When it comes to orders of plants, fungi, and algae, it always uses the suffix ales. Then the 5th of the pyramid, we have family, which the family names of plants, fungi, and algae end with the suffix ace. Then 6th in line, we have the genus, which is usually the first name of the bacteria. Then after that, we have species, which is the second word of the name of the bacteria. Now we're going to talk about Yersinia pestis. This is the bacteria that caused the Black Plague. We're going to be talking about the classifications. First, we have the domain, which is classified as bacteria. Second, we have phylum, which is proteobacteria. Third, then we have class, which is gamma proteobacteria. Then for order, we have Enterobacteriales. Then for family, we have Yersiniaceae. Then for genus, we have Yersinia. Lastly, for species, we have Yersinia pestis. That is the classification taxonomy of Yersinia pestis, the bacteria that caused the Black Plague in the time period of, also known as the Black Death.
Hi, my name is Jiren Hussein, and I'll be discussing the structure and other things having to do with the disease that Yersinia pestis cause. The structure of Yersinia pestis is similar to most other bacteria, with free-flowing chromosomal DNA, ribosome, cytoplasm, cell membrane, and cell wall. It also shares what occurs naturally in bacterial cells, which is plasmids, a small circular double-stranded DNA molecule that is distinct from the larger chromosomal DNA. The nuance comes from what these plasmids do. The plasmid in the lower left corner at the bottom of the graphic is the PCD1 plasmid. This plasmid is shared with another bacteria in the same genus of Yersinia pseudotuberculosis. This one helps overtakes the function of the lungs, and that's where the pneumonic part of the Black Death that we'll discuss later comes in. The other 2 plasmids are unique to Yersinia pestis itself, the PCP1 and the PMT1. These plasmids contribute uniquely to Yersinia pestis and are thought to promote the ability of this organism to penetrate deep tissue and contribute to the acute infections associated with this species. Now, Yersinia pestis and the disease's cause has been lovingly dubbed the Black Death because of the color that extremities turn from tissue necrosis that this bacteria causes. It causes lymph nodes to turn large and become infected and turn black and become something called buboes, which gives the name for the bubonic plague. And in another form, the septicemic plague, which we will discuss later, it turns extremities black from tissue necrosis. And other facts about Yersinia pestis later, when it was researched closer in a lab, is that the Yersinia pestis is non-mobile when it's in a host, but when it's outside of a host, isolated by itself, it can move.
On this slide, we're going to be talking about replication and how this process happens with binary fission. So, a bacteria cell is a prokaryotic cell, which you can see in the diagram. A bacteria cell has a chromosomal DNA, which you can see the label on the blue, and a bacteria cell also has a plasmid DNA, which is the little red dot on the diagram. Binary fission begins since bacteria is prokaryotic, which divides and replicates. So the first step is that chromosomal DNA and DNA plasmids replicates. Step 2 is the prokaryotic cell then gets bigger, which leads to the chromosome DNA and the plasmids to start moving to the ends of the poles of the cells. Step 3, now the cytoplasm starts to divide in order to form two identical daughter cells. Afterwards, the cell walls start reforming along the divided cytoplasm. This leads into each new cell to have a copy of chromosomal DNA and different numbers of plasmid DNA, which is shown in step 5. Now we're going to deep dive about the Black Death. So to begin with, I want to talk about the 3 plagues that the Black Death had. So I'm going to read this to you. There are several different forms of diseases caused by plague. First, it was the Bubonic Plague, the least dangerous form, which was transmitted by fleas and was characterized by swollen and enlarged lymph nodes. The second was the Bubonic Plague. This was a severe lung infection which caused transmission from person to person by it being airborne. Finally, we have the septicemic plague, which was the rarest form where the bacteria gets disseminated in the bloodstream.
More on the disease caused by Yersinia pestis. It was lovingly dubbed the Black Death due to the occurrence of black around your extremities due to necrosis, and the black color your lymph nodes would turn as soon as it started swelling. The Black Death, Yersinia pestis, had killed more than 50 million people in Europe and Asia combined. And one part in the Middle Ages had wiped out a third of the population of Europe. It has killed more people than any other event since, and there's multiple ways to contract it. Bubonic plague is the most common and actually safest way. Well, I shouldn't say safest. It has the highest recovery rate, which is saying a lot because the recovery rate for bubonic plague is only about 50 to 75%. For septicemic and pneumonic plague, there is absolutely almost no hope of survival. Bubonic plague is not spread by person-to-person contact, which is one good thing about it. This one is where the Yersinia pestis bacteria will attach onto the lymph nodes and enlarge them, creating buboes, large black swollen lymph nodes. These will be extremely painful and cause a lot of pain and fever, The second one is septicemic, in which the bacteria causes infections in the bloodstream, leading to sepsis and ultimately death in 99% of the cases. Septicemic plague is known for showing up in necrosis of the tissue, where fingers and other extremities in the body turn black and die. Pneumonic plague is when the bacteria attacks the lungs. A lot of people cough up blood because of the destructive power of this bacteria. Overall, the bubonic plague was so devastating because even if you contract the one with the most recovery rate, which is the bubonic version of Yersinia pestis, it can still become septicemic and pneumonic. A lot of the cases, what had killed people who had contracted bubonic plague wasn't the first plague itself. It was a secondary pneumonic infection from Yersinia pestis. The same thing could happen with septicemic. In the slight chance you do survive, there is a high likely of getting the secondary pneumonic plague. I have refrained from showing any actual images of those who had unfortunately caught the bubonic plague because I like to eat, and I assume you do too. I would ask you to refrain from seeking images of the following things described because they are graphic. A general overview of the symptoms that an infection by Yersinia pestis can cause include fever, swelling of the glands, chills, pain, seizures, and headaches. If you were fortunate enough to get the primary bubonic plague, which had a 50 to 75% mortality rate, you would at best have a couple days of life before a slight chance of recovery or death. If you were unfortunate and got primary septicemic or pneumonic plague, the symptoms would be immobilizing within a day or at worst a couple hours. Back in the Middle Ages, medicine wasn't very sophisticated. At best, they could give you medicinal herbs or bloodletting in order to alleviate symptoms or an attempt to alleviate them. But without an actual studying of the true human anatomy or bacterial theory, there really wasn't a way to cure it until modern medicine. Today, we can cure the bubonic plague or an infection by Yersinia pestis with antibiotics. But if the antibiotics didn't exist back in the Middle Ages when this plague ran rampant, how did people in Europe survive? Why did it not cause the apocalypse? How did it end in Europe? Or how did the reign of Yersinia pestis end? And the thing is, it never really did. The plague went away for a while, but within the next 10 years, a new plague would return as the bacteria mutated and infect more people. But why didn't it have the same effect as it did back in the first breakout of the Black Death? And that's because those who are susceptible to it just died, and those who survived had gained immunity. Another thing is that this plague was so hard on the body and it caused a lot of physical deformities that people just stayed at home and social distance. So for versions like the pneumonic plague, it really helped with stopping the spread of the Yersinia pestis because people just didn't go outside. Period.